I'd like to argue in a new way for the reliability of the Gospels, and so I'm going to use several Bible verses here. It has to do with creeds that Paul has incorporated in several of his letters. And so, of course, we can date the Gospels and say, well, maybe 50s and 60s, maybe even 40s if you really want to push it that far, but most scholars will say, well, probably from the 50s or 60s on up. And we say, well, that's quite a bit of time between then and the time of Jesus. So, could anything have gone wrong? Maybe they got some of the information incorrect. Well, now they're finding inside of Paul's letters are all these creeds, these statements that Paul did not invent. He did not create these. He's very clear. He says, I'm passing them along to you. And I just want to share some of them. They're early statements of faith. They're actually going to precede the Gospels. And I'll tell you in just a minute how much they precede them by as far as time goes. Here's the first one. It's in 1 Corinthians 15. Chapter 15, verse 3. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance. So there's his comment that this is rabbinical way of saying, I took some information and I'm sending along to you. Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day. He appeared to Peter, then to the 12, and he talks about all these people that saw the risen Christ. Now, it's powerful, and wait a second, because I want to tell you about the dating of this, so it's going to make it really amazing. Let's take a look now at Philippians chapter 2. This is a famous passage about Jesus and what all he gave up to come to this earth. It says, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, and on and on. So a lot of verses there. People that have read this very carefully say, this is not Paul, this is not his creation, this is a very early hymn. And we'll talk about how early it is in just a minute. Here's another passage. This comes from Colossians this time. Colossians 1, verse 15. Talking about Jesus again. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, for by him all things were created, things in heaven, on earth, etc., etc. So he is the creator of the entire universe that we know. Quite a statement. But that, again, is not something that Paul is inventing. He got this from the early days of Christianity, where the new converts are being told, here's exactly what you need to believe. Here's what we think the real Christian story is. Let's do one more in 1 Timothy chapter 3, starts in verse 16. Talks about Jesus again. He appeared in a body, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, was taken up in glory. And so that, you can probably hear there's sort of a rhythm to that. So it'd be very easy for early converts to memorize that. So that's what we're getting out of the Bible. Now people are starting to look at this as a new field of inquiry when it comes to who knew what when. And in Galatians, Paul tells us that he went to Jerusalem. He got a chance to talk to Peter. He got to talk to John. He got to talk to James. And my guess is, and this is what a lot of scholars believe, that that's the time that he got these wonderful little pieces of creeds, these statements of faith. And many scholars, catch this, they think that these creeds may go back to the very year of Jesus' death and resurrection, the very year. So now here the gospel sitting out at maybe 50 or 60 or 70 A.D., are they making up stuff? Is there error in there? No, they're telling the very same story that we hear from the very start of Christianity. I mean, honest to goodness, this is the best message by the best people at the best time, at the very heart, the very start of Christianity. We're hearing that Jesus is God, that he rose from the dead, and we can have that same kind of victory ourselves. What a good message, huh?